The boy was already braced for the word "no" before anyone had said anything at all. I have watched men flinch from a raised hand. I have watched horses learn, before the second beating, to fold their ears flat at the sound of a particular boot on gravel. But I had never, until that gray morning on the Quartz Creek Road, watched a child arrange his whole small body around the expectation of being turned away. He stood a half step in front of the other 9. Chin up, the way you hold a chin up when it wants to drop. And in his eyes was the oldest, most exhausted thing I have ever seen in a person who could not have been more than 12 years old. He had already decided that we would not want them, and he had come anyway, so that the younger ones would not have to hear it first. There were 10 of them. 10 children the orphan agent could not place, returned and returned again like coins nobody trusts, riding the last cold mile to a ranch that could not, by any arithmetic I knew how to do, afford a single one of them. And I want to tell you what Eli Caldwell did when that boy opened his mouth to spare us the trouble of rejecting them. But first you have to understand the kind of man Eli was before that morning, because that is the only way you'll understand why what he said next nearly broke me. A grown man, 40 years rough, who hadn't wept since they put my brother in the ground. Stay with me. This one I have carried a long time. I keep a ledger. I have kept one since I was 19, and a trail boss named Holly's told me a man who can't account for his own days will be accounted for by other men and won't like the sums. So I write things down. Cattle bought, cattle lost, wages owed, the weather, the small idiocies of the men under me. It is a habit I am not proud of and cannot break. My wife, when I had one, used to say I'd write down my own dying if I could find a steady hand for it. I tell you this so you'll know that the date is not invention. The 22nd of October, a Tuesday. The first hard frost of the year had come the night before and gone to fog by morning, and the whole valley lay under it like something not yet decided. I was at the corral fence mending a top rail that a fool gelding had cribbed half through, and I had my tin of tobacco open on the post, and I was, I will admit, in a mood. We had lost 40 head to the screwworm that summer. The bank in Coldwater had sent a second letter. Eli had read it at the kitchen table and folded it into eighths until it was the size of a postage stamp and said nothing, which from Eli was the same as another man shouting. That was the ranch I want you to picture. Not a prosperous one. A good one, a clean one, a place where the fences held and the men were paid on time, even when paying them on time meant Eli ate beans for a month, but not a place with room to spare. Not in money. Not in the heart, I'd have told you if you'd asked me that morning. Eli Caldwell was a closed door. I had ridden for him 11 years, and I knew the man the way you know weather by its effects, never its reasons. He'd had a wife, Sarah, and a daughter, a little thing called June, who used to ride the milk cow like a pony and scream with the joy of it. The diphtheria took them both in the same fortnight in the winter of '74, 4 years before the morning I'm telling you about, and Eli had buried them on the rise behind the house under 2 stones he cut and lettered himself because he would not let the mason touch them. After that, he did not speak of them. Not once. He took the little chair June used to sit in at the table and he carried it out to the barn, and I do not know what he did with it, but it was never in the house again. The man closed the door on it, and he leaned his whole weight against that door for 4 years, and the rest of us learned to walk soft past it. So, the wagon came up the Quartz Creek Road out of the fog at a little past 9. I heard it before I saw it, the particular complaint of an axle that wants grease and won't get it, and under that, a sound I couldn't place. A high thin sound that the fog flattened out. I thought at first it was a wheel. It wasn't a wheel. It was a child crying, very quietly, the way a child cries when she has learned that crying loudly changes nothing. I set down my hammer. The agent driving was a man named Prout, narrow as a fence post, with a celluloid collar gone yellow and the expression of a man who has been disappointed so consistently he has come to find it restful. I'd heard of the orphan trains, everybody had. The eastern cities, choked with children nobody could feed, loading them onto westbound cars by the hundred, parading them in the church halls of little prairie towns so that farmers could look them over and pick the strong ones to work and the pretty ones to keep. It was charity, and it was a labor sale, and nobody was entirely sure which, least of all, I think, the children. What I had not heard of was a wagon load nobody had picked. "Caldwell Place," Pruitt said, hauling up. "It is. He expecting me?" He was not, but I have learned not to answer questions like that one too quick, so I climbed up on the rail to see into the wagon bed, and what I saw I have never quite been able to set down right in the ledger, though God knows I tried that night. 10 of them, packed in under 2 gray blankets that weren't enough. The oldest a boy, 12 maybe, sitting up straight against the buckboard with his arm thrown back over the younger ones the way a man braces a load that's shifting. A girl of about 9 with her face turned into his side. Twins, I'd find out later, no more than 4, asleep with that total animal abandoned small children manage anywhere. And the rest in between, all of them with that scrubbed and still dirty look of children who have been cleaned up too many times by too many strangers in too many cold halls. And every single one of them was awake now and looking at me, and not one of them said a word. You have to understand, children are noise. Children are the noisiest thing God made. A wagon of 10 children ought to have been a riot. This was a silence with eyes in it, and I understood, standing on that rail with my tobacco going stale on the post behind me, that this was a silence they had practiced. That somewhere along the line, Boston, or the train, or the 4th town that didn't want them, they had learned that the safest thing a child can be, in front of a stranger who holds your fate, is quiet and small and easy. "Town wouldn't take 'em," Pruitt said, following my look without any particular feeling in it. "We had the placing out at the Coldwater Methodist last evening. Folks took 4, good strong ones." He said it like he was describing the disposal of a litter. "These are what's left. Agency rule is I'm to keep 'em together where I can. There's siblings in this lot, but nobody'll take the whole string, and I'm not running a hotel. Coldwater's got no county home. Nearest is Helena, 90 mile, and they're full to the rafters." He worked his jaw. "Somebody at the church said Caldwell had land and no family, said maybe he'd want hands." Hands? I looked at the twins, 4 years old, asleep. "Wait here," I said. I found Eli in the tack room oiling a bridle he had already oiled. I have replayed the next minute more times than is healthy. I stood in the doorway with the fog coming in cold behind me, and I said, "Eli, there's a wagon, orphan agent. Got 10 kids in the back town wouldn't take, and he's looking to leave 'em." I watched the words land on him. Now I knew what I expected. I expected him to go very still, which he did. I expected the door in him to swing shut, which I felt happen, a kind of internal latch, a sound you couldn't hear. For years I had watched him keep that door shut against anything that smelled of children, of family, of June. I had seen him cross a street in Coldwater to avoid a woman with a baby. I expected him to set down the bridle and say no, tell him no, tell him to drive on. And I had already half decided I would not argue, because the bank letter was the size of a postage stamp in the kitchen and 40 head were dead in the dirt that summer, and the arithmetic was the arithmetic. What Eli said was, "How many of them are crying?" I had not expected that. "One," I said, "a little one, quiet about it." He set the bridle on the hook. Slow. He wiped his hands on the rag, finger by finger, the way he did everything, like a man who had decided long ago that hurry was a kind of lying. And then he walked past me out into the fog, and I followed him. And I want to tell you about his face as he crossed that yard, but I can't, because he kept it turned away from me, and now I think that was on purpose. I think he did not want a witness to whatever was happening on it. He came up alongside the wagon. He did not climb the rail the way I had. He stood at the back of it at the open end. Hat in his hand, and that surprised me too, a man baring his head to 10 children, and he looked at them one at a time. He took his time. Pruitt started to say something about agency forms, and Eli lifted one finger off the brim of his hat, just lifted it, and Prout stopped. And the boy, the oldest, the one with his arm thrown back over the others, that boy looked at Eli looking at them, and I watched him gather himself. I watched him do the bravest, saddest thing I have ever seen a person do. He moved his sister's head gently off his shoulder. He stood up in the wagon bed so that he was the only one standing, so that whatever came next would come at him and not at them. And he said, in a voice that he had clearly rehearsed to be steady, and that cracked anyway right down the middle, "We can split up if we have to, mister. I know nobody wants all of us. The little ones eat hardly anything. Take who you want and I won't make trouble about the rest." A breath. "Just, if you can, don't separate the twins. They scream in the night when they can't reach each other. That's all I'd ask. The rest of us are used to it. The rest of us are used to it." He was 12. I had to look at the fog after that. I had to look at the gray nothing of the fog and find my tobacco tin in my pocket and worry the lid of it with my thumb, because a man my age does not stand in his own yard and come apart in front of children and an orphan agent with a yellow collar. I worked that tin lid till the hinge of it bit my thumb. Eli did not look at the fog. Eli looked at the boy. And here is the thing I came to tell you. Here is the thing I have carried 11 years longer than I rode for him. He did not say yes. He did not say you can all stay. I think he knew, the way he knew weather, that those words said too fast and too kind would land on those children like another lie, because every kind thing anyone had said to them had so far turned out to be the front porch of a no. They had been promised before. You could see it on them. Kindness was a sound they had learned to brace against, same as the boy braced against the word he expected. So Eli did not promise them anything. He reached up slow, that finger-by-finger slowness, and he set his hand on the wagon rail next to the boy's boot. And he said low only to him, but in the fog with everyone silent it carried to all of us, "Son, get down off there and help me figure where 10 people are going to sleep tonight. Because I've got one house and it's too small and we're going to have to build on, and I'd rather not do the figuring alone." That was all. Where are 10 people going to sleep tonight? Not whether. Not if. He skipped clean over the weather like it had never been a question, like the question had never had any business existing, and he went straight to the carpentry of it, the practical impossible joiner's problem of housing 10 children before frost came back at nightfall. And in skipping the weather, he told that boy the only thing the boy could not have survived hearing as a promise. He told it to him as a fact, as a thing already decided in a country before words, as weather. And the boy stood there, and his face did a thing I won't try to describe because describing it would cheapen it. And then he sat down. He just sat down, all at once, on the edge of the wagon bed with his feet hanging off like his legs had finished being legs, and he put both hands over his face, and his shoulders went. The little ones, who had been so terribly quiet, who had learned that quiet was safe, they saw him break, and somehow they understood it was the good kind of breaking, the kind that only happens when the bracing stops, and the whole wagon of them came apart at once into the ordinary glorious wailing racket that children are supposed to make, and it filled up that fogged-in valley like the first water down a dry creek. I stood at the fence and worked my tobacco tin, and was no use to anybody. Prout cleared his throat and started in about the forms. There were a great many forms. Eli signed them on the lowered tailgate of the wagon, every one in that careful schoolboy hand he had, the same hand he'd used on the 2 gray stones up on the rise. I caught one of the papers as the fog damp curled it. Surname of placing family. He wrote Caldwell 10 times. He wrote it 10 times and his hand did not hurry and it did not shake. And only the last time, on the line for the youngest twin, did the pen stop for the length of a held breath before it moved. Then it moved. We got them inside. We got the stove roaring and we used up a week of coffee and most of a side of bacon, and the kitchen that had been a quiet man's quiet kitchen for 4 years was suddenly the loudest room in the territory. And Eli stood against the wall by the cold hearth and watched it happen with an expression I had not seen on him since before the diphtheria winter. An expression I had, I realized with a small private shock, given up ever seeing again. Not happiness. It was rawer than happiness. It was the look of a man standing in a draft from a door that has been shut so long he'd forgotten it was a door, feeling the cold and the air come through it together, and not yet knowing which one will be more than he can bear. The boy's name was Asa. The 9-year-old who'd had her face in his side was Mercy. The twins were Tom and Tilda, and that gave me a turn, the Tom, my own name in that tiny mouth, and the others I'll bring to you as they come, because that's how I learned them, one at a time over the long, terrible, wonderful winter that followed. And to list them now like stock in the ledger would be to do the thing I am trying in this whole account not to do. That first night, after the little ones were down, we made pallets. We used every blanket on the place and Eli's own and mine, and the twins we put together so they could reach each other, and they slept like two halves of one thing. Eli and I sat at the table with the lamp low, and the bank letter still folded to a postage stamp by his elbow. Eli, I said, I had to say it. 11 years of his wages had bought him my honesty, and I owed it to him now of all nights. We can't feed 10 children through a winter. I've done the figures. You've done the figures. The bank's done the figures, and that's what the letter is. By spring we'll have lost the... I know what we'll have lost by spring. He didn't say it sharp. He said it tired and certain, and he turned the lamp wick down another notch so the room went gold and small around us. He looked at the doorway to the dark front room where 10 children were breathing. Tom, he said me, this time, not the boy, you ever notice how a man'll spend 4 years guarding a thing so close he forgets to check, is it even still there to guard? I didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer to that. I've been keeping that door shut, he said, against losing them again. Sarah and June, like if I never opened it I'd never have to bury anybody again. He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn on the wood, a quarter turn back. And then a wagon comes up the road with 10 of 'em in it that the whole world's already done buried in every way but the ground, already grieved over and set down and drove on from. Town wouldn't take 'em. Helena's full, quarter turn. And I'm standing in the tack room, Tom, and I'm fixing to do the same thing. Drive on, keep the door shut. He looked at me, and I thought, that boy out there is 12 years old and he just offered to be cut up into pieces so the little ones don't have to hear no first. He's done more bravery before 9 in the morning than I've managed in 4 years. The lamp ticked. Out in the dark a small voice murmured something in sleep and another small voice answered it, and then both went quiet, reaching each other. I can't promise him anything, Eli said. I can't promise him a spring. I can't promise the bank won't take the whole thing out from under all of us by April. God knows I can't promise none of 'em'll get sick, and you know what that word does to me, sick, in this house. His jaw worked. But I'll be damned, Tom, before I'm one more no in the long line of no that boy's been counting. He stood. He picked up the postage stamp letter and he held it a second over the lamp chimney, and I thought he meant to burn it, and some fool hopeful part of me wanted him to, and then he didn't. He set it in the drawer instead and shut the drawer. Burning it won't make it untrue, he said to himself more than me. We'll just have to make it untrue some other way. In the morning. He went to the doorway of the dark room. He stood there a long while with his back to me, looking at the shapes of them on the floor, and I do not know what passed across his face because, again, he kept it turned away. I have come to believe he spent that minute up on the rise in his mind, with the 2 gray stones, asking somebody's permission, or maybe giving himself some. Then he said, very quiet, not really to me at all, Sarah always did say this house was too quiet. And he turned the lamp down to nothing, and we went to whatever sleep we could find. 10 children and 2 old men under one too small roof, with the frost coming back down over the valley, and the bank arithmetic locked in a drawer, and the whole impossible winter waiting out there in the dark like weather you can smell but can't yet see. I lay awake a long time listening to them breathe. I did not write the day's entry in the ledger till the next evening. When I finally did, I sat with the pen over the page a good while because I did not know how to account for what had come up that road. 40 head dead in the summer, a letter from the bank, that I knew how to write. But this. In the end, I wrote only one line for the 22nd of October. I wrote 10 came, he kept the door open. And then I had to stop, because my hand wasn't steady, and Holly's was wrong about one thing all those years ago. There are some sums a man cannot account for, and the not being able to is the truest entry he'll ever make. You do not build a wing onto a house in October in Montana. Every man in the valley would have told Eli that, and several of them did, leaning on the corral fence with their hats pushed back, and that particular pleasure men take in explaining to another man why the thing he means to do cannot be done. The ground sets up hard by November. You can't dig a proper footing. The mortar won't cure. You'll have green lumber, the whole place'll twist, and you'll be chinking gaps against a blizzard you should have beat by a month. Eli listened to all of it. He had a way of listening that made men think he was agreeing because he didn't interrupt, and he nodded at the practical parts. And then when they were done he'd say, "All true, but there's 10 of 'em and one of me, and the frost don't care that I'm late." And he'd pick his hammer back up. We built it anyway. I want to be honest about that winter, because the easy thing, the thing that would make a better story and a worse true one, would be to tell you it was warmth and laughter and the door swinging open onto sunlight. Some of it was. A great deal of it was not. There were nights the wind came off the divide like it had a grudge, and found every gap in our green lumber wing, and we moved the children's pallets back into the main room and slept stacked like cordwood, and Eli sat up feeding the stove because he did not trust it to hold, and did not trust himself to sleep through the not holding. There were 2 solid weeks in January I will not pretend were anything but a siege. And there was the money. The money was the wolf at the door the whole time, and it did not have the decency to howl. It just sat out there in the dark of the drawer where the letter was, patient, doing its arithmetic. But that is part 3's wolf. Let me give you the children first, because you have a right to them, and because keeping them faceless would be its own kind of leaving them in the wagon. Asa was the oldest, and he did not know how to be a child, and that was the first thing the ranch had to teach him, and it was harder than teaching him to rope. He had been the wall in front of the others so long that he'd forgotten there could be a wall in front of him. The first week he would not sleep until everyone else was down, and then he'd post himself by the door like a sentry, and Eli found him there the 3rd night and did not order him to bed. Eli almost never ordered, I came to notice. He arranged things so the right choice was the easy one. He just dragged a second chair over and sat down next to him in the dark and said, "2 of us watching's better'n 1. You take till midnight. I've got after." And he made the boy a partner in the watching instead of an orphan being put to bed. And somewhere around the 4th night of that, the boy fell asleep in his chair before his own watch was up, because, for the first time in his life, somebody else had the door. Mercy, the 9-year-old, talked. Lord, she talked. After that first practice silence broke, it was as though a dam had gone, and out of her came everything. Every place they'd been, every hall they'd stood in, the names of children who'd been picked out of their group in other towns, and the names of the families who'd picked them, recited like a liturgy, like if she said them often enough she'd keep from forgetting anyone. She had taken it on herself to remember. That was her wall, the way Asa's was his body. Mercy's was her memory, the keeping of everyone who'd been peeled off the group along the way. I'd find her some evenings counting on her fingers and moving her lips, and I knew she was doing the role of the lost, and I never once told her to stop, though it broke something in me every time. The twins, Tom and Tilda, I have told you of. 4 years old, and the world to each other, and slowly, over weeks, the world widened for them to include the milk cow, and the old dog Buck who appointed himself their personal furniture, and a one-eyed orange cat that materialized in the new wing the way cats do, and refused to be evicted. The first time Tilda laughed, really laughed, the bottomless belly laugh of a small child, at Buck sneezing, I saw Eli stop dead in the yard with an armload of stovewood and stand there a full minute. June, I knew, had laughed like that. He set the wood down very carefully after a while and went back for more, and his eyes were wet, and we both pretended they weren't, which is the kindest thing two men can do for each other. Then there were the others, and now I'll bring them since you've earned them. There was Eli. The boy was called Eli too, which made for a tangle, so the children took to calling our Eli Mr. C, and the boy stayed Eli, and our Eli pretended that didn't get to him and it got to him. Boy Eli was 7, and silent in a way different from the practiced wagon silence. A stutter had been beaten into him somewhere by someone. You could see the flinch in him when words wouldn't come, and Mr. C, who was the most patient man I ever knew with a green horse and had no idea he was about to apply the same gift to a child, never once finished a word for that boy. Never once. He'd just wait. He'd wait through the whole long stuck struggle of a word like it was the most natural thing in the world to wait. And by February, the boy's stutter had eased about half, which the doctor in Coldwater later said he'd never have credited. There was Rose, 11, who stole bread at first, hiding crusts in her dress in her pallet in a knothole in the new wing, the deep instinct of a child who has been hungry and does not believe the next meal is real until she can touch the one she's holding back. Eli found her caches. He found all of them. And he never said a word about it except that one morning a tin appeared on the kitchen shelf, a clean lard tin with a lid, and he said to the room in general, not to Rose, "Anybody wants to keep something back for later, that's the keeping tin. It's allowed. It stays full as anybody likes." And he made her crime into a cupboard. He gave the fear a legal home. By March the tin sat mostly empty because she'd stopped needing it, but he kept it on the shelf for years. I heard long after, just in case anyone ever needed to believe again that there'd be a later. There was Samuel, 10, angry, the one who tested it, because there's always one who has to find the edge of the new kindness to learn whether it's real or just better painted than the last. He broke things. He broke a window on purpose and watched Eli's face to see the no finally come out, the real one, the one underneath. And Eli looked at the broken window and looked at the boy who'd broken it and said, "Cold's coming in. You and me are going to fix it before supper, and you're going to learn how, so the next time something's broke in your life you're not standing around waiting on somebody else to fix it." And they fixed the window, together, in the cold. And Samuel cried while they did it, furious that he was crying, and Eli let him cry and handed him the putty knife, and did not say one soft word. And that, the not going soft, the treating the rage as a thing that could be worked rather than a thing that frightened him, that was what finally reached the boy, somewhere down where the softer men before had never gotten. And there were the 3 littlest besides the twins Hannah, and a baby really Lily, not 2 yet, and a boy named Caleb who was 5 and who did not speak at all that whole first month, not from a stutter, just from somewhere having decided that speaking was not safe, and who broke that silence finally one evening in the most ordinary way imaginable. He tugged Mr. C's sleeve at the table and pointed at the gravy and said, "More. Just more." And the whole table went still, every child of them knowing what it meant that Caleb had spoken, and Mr. C, God bless him, did not make it a ceremony. He just said, "Sure, son," and passed the gravy, like it was nothing, like a 5-year-old asking for more gravy was the most natural sound in the world and not the first word in a month in a small private resurrection. And only I, watching close, saw his hand tremble on the gravy boat. 10 of them. I had said we could not feed 10 children through a winter. I was right about the arithmetic and wrong about everything that mattered, and the winter taught me the difference slow, the way real teaching is always slow. Here is the morally heavy thing. I promised you one, and a true account owes its debts. In late February, the screwworm money came due, the note Eli had taken in the summer to cover the dead 40 head, separate from the bank's big note, a smaller debt to a cattle dealer named Harmon out of Coldwater, and Harmon was not a patient man and not a kind one. He rode out one thaw-mud morning and sat his horse in the yard and would not get down, which is a thing men do to tell you they don't mean to stay friendly. He wanted his money. Eli didn't have it. Eli had spent it on lumber and bacon and a doctor's 2 visits and a winter's worth of staying alive 11 mouths deep. Harmon knew that. Harmon had not ridden out expecting money. Harmon had ridden out to make an offer, and the offer was this, and I was standing close enough to hear all of it, and I have wished 100 times since that I hadn't. "I'll forgive the whole note," Harmon said, easy from up on his horse. "Whole thing, walk away square." He let it sit. "I need a boy, strong one. Years indenture, maybe 2, work it off proper. That oldest of yours looks about able." He nodded at the new wing where a sow was, in fact, just then visible carrying water. "Give me the boy on paper and your debt's gone and you've 1 less mouth besides. Math's in your favor twice over, Caldwell." I watched Eli. I want to tell you he didn't even consider it. That would be the lie that makes the better story. The truth is he considered it. I saw him consider it. I saw the arithmetic move behind his eyes, the same cold, honest arithmetic that had been locked in the drawer all winter, because Eli was not a fool and not a saint. He was a man with a failing ranch and 11 dependents and a wolf at the door. And here was a man offering to shoot the wolf in exchange for 1 child who was, after all, nearly grown, who could after all survive an indenture, who would after all be fed. And the price of refusing might be all 10 of them losing the roof come spring. And what kind of mercy is it to keep a boy and lose the house out from under the other 9? That is the heavy thing. That is the decision. It was not will he be kind. By February everyone knew Eli was kind. The decision was, whose suffering do you choose when you cannot choose none? The boy's near certain hard years against the 9's possible ruin. He stood in the mud and held that scale, and I held my breath. And Asa, who had set the water down, who heard everything, who had been hearing his whole life. Asa walked up to the 2 men and set himself in front of his own self the way he'd set himself in front of the others in the wagon, and he said to Eli, "Steady this time. No crack in it. 4 months of being fed and safe, having put iron where the wagon day fear had been. I'll go, Mr. C. It's all right. I worked before. The note's more important than me, and you got 9 others depending on it." And then, because he had learned this house, because he had learned that here the brave thing and the loved thing were allowed to be the same thing, he added lower, "I just want to come back. After. If I worked it off honest, I'd want to be able to come back here. That's all I'd ask." That's all I'd ask. The same words, the wagon words. He had come the whole circle back to them. And that, the comeback, that was the thing that decided Eli. I saw it land. Because a boy doesn't ask to come back to a place he's only been kept at. A boy asks to come back to a home, and you cannot, having given a child a home for the first time in his life, then sell the home out from under him to pay for a lumber bill, because then it was never a home at all. It was just a better painted hall. And Eli would rather lose the ranch than turn his house back into one more place these children had been picked over in. He said to Harmon, and his voice was the weather voice, the weather-skipping voice, flat and final as frost, "No. Caldwell, you'll have your money, not your boy. I'll sell the North Quarter to Pierce before I'll put a child of mine on an indenture paper, and the boy is a child of mine. You signed the form yourself, or your agency did." He stepped back. "Get down and have coffee or ride on, Harmon, but the offer's dead where it sits, and don't make it again in front of him." Harmon rode on. "And the cost of that, the North Quarter, the best water on the place, sold to a neighbor for a song, because a song was all anybody had cash for that hungry spring. The cost of that was real, and it is the kind of cost a sentimental story leaves out and a true one cannot. Eli bought those children's belonging with the best land he had. He never once let on it grieved him. It grieved him. I saw it in the ledger of his face. The day Pierce's hands ran the new fence across what had been Caldwell water for 30 years. But Asa stayed. And that night Asa sat by the door for his watch, and Eli dragged the second chair over same as the first week, and the boy said, into the dark, "You sold the North Quarter." "Did. For me. For all of you. You're the one was standing there. A long quiet. Then Eli said the truest thing I ever heard him say, and he said it to the dark, not the boy, the way men say the truest things. I had a daughter once asked me would I always come get her if she was ever lost, and I said I would. And then she got lost somewhere I couldn't follow, and I couldn't keep the promise, and it like to killed me, the not keeping it. The stove ticked. I can't get her back. But I'm damned if I'll let one more child ask me will I come get them and have to tell them no. There's land enough in this world to lose. There ain't another June. The boy didn't say anything. But in the morning I found them both asleep in the two chairs by the door, the old man and the boy. The door watched and held between them, and I left them, and I did not write that in the ledger because some things you keep in the other ledger, the one a man carries inside, the one Hollies never knew about. The wolf was still out there. The big note, the bank's note, the postage stamp letter in the drawer, the North Quarter money went to Harmon and bought us belonging but not the spring. April was coming, and with it the day the bank in Coldwater would want what the bank in Coldwater was owed, and there was no North Quarter left to sell, and 11 mouths do not eat less because a man has been brave. I had stopped doing the arithmetic. I want to confess that. I, who cannot leave a sum alone, who Hollies taught at 19, had stopped running the figures by March, because the figures only said the one thing, and the one thing was that we were going to lose it, and I could not bear to keep writing the answer to a question I'd already answered. Eli hadn't stopped. Eli ran the figures every night, but he ran them different now. I'd watch him at the table with the lamp low, and I came to understand he wasn't running them to find the way out. There wasn't one, and he knew it. He was running them to know exactly how much time he had left to give these children before the ground came out from under all of us. He was counting down the safe days the way Mercy counted the lost children on her fingers, keeping the roll, keeping faith with the count. What neither of us knew, what I'll tell you in the last part, because it's where the whole thing turns, and turns in a way I did not see coming and have never entirely been able to explain, except to say the world is sometimes less cruel than its own arithmetic, was that the valley had been watching too. The day the bank came due was the 9th of April, and it came up bright, which felt like an insult. After a winter that had thrown everything it had at us, the morning the wolf finally walked up to the door in daylight was clear and mild and smelled of thaw. The first day you could believe in green again, and I remember thinking that was just like the world. To make the day it took everything from you, the prettiest day of the year, so you'd never be able to love a spring morning again without tasting it. The banker's name was Ostrander. He came out from Coldwater in a buggy with a clerk and a document case, and Eli met him in the yard in his good shirt. He'd put on his good shirt. The burying shirt, the one he'd worn for Sarah and June, and I understood the message of it, and so, I think, did Ostrander. I am dressed for a death. Eli had no money and no land left to sell and no story to tell that the bank had not heard from 100 failing ranchers in 100 bright, cruel springs, and he knew it, and he had dressed for it. The children were inside. Asa had them quiet. They'd gotten good at reading the weather of the grown-ups by then, and they knew this was a bad weather day, and they kept the little ones back from the windows. Only Mercy watched from the corner of the glass, doing I am sure her count. Ostrander opened the document case. He was not a cruel man, I'll say that for him. He was a tired one, a man who'd foreclosed enough ranches that he'd built the same kind of restful disappointment into himself that Prout the orphan agent wore, and the two of them, the man who disposed of children and the man who disposed of homes, could have been brothers. He started in on the formal language, the whereas and the defaulted upon, and the institution is regrettably compelled. And that is when the first wagon came up the Quartz Creek Road. It was Pierce, him that had bought the North Quarter. He pulled into the yard mid-whereas and got down and didn't say anything to anybody, just walked up and stood next to Eli, shoulder to shoulder, facing the banker, the way a man stands next to another man to say we're two now. Then the Dolan brothers came, both wagons. Then old Mrs. Pyle, who'd buried 2 husbands and feared nothing on God's earth including bankers, in her dead second husband's buggy with her dead second husband's shotgun across her knees. not pointed at anybody, just present, the way a fact is present. Then the Methodist minister from Coldwater, the same church that had held the placing out in October, the same hall where the town had taken the 4 strong ones and left the 10. And he had with him a wooden collection box, and I learned later he'd passed it 3 Sundays running with a sermon I'd have liked to have heard. Then more. I lost the count, and I am a man who does not lose counts. Wagons and horses and men on foot, the whole valley, the same men who'd leaned on the fence in October and explained why it couldn't be done, and I understood, watching them fill up the yard, that they had not been doubting Eli that day. They had been watching him. They had stood at the fence and told him it couldn't be done, and then they had gone home and watched all winter to see if the fool would do it anyway. Watched the green lumber wing go up against the frost. Watched the smoke come out the new chimney through the January siege. Watched a closed-up grieving man open his door to 10 children the town itself had turned away. And the watching had done something to them, the way watching real courage does something to people. It had shamed them, and then it had moved them, and then, sometime in that long, cold winter, it had decided them. Mrs. Pyle spoke first because she always did. "Mr. Ostrander," she said, "before you finish your whereases, you might want to count what's come up the road this morning, on account of it's going to change your arithmetic some." The minister came forward with the box. The Dollins had a jar. Pierce had a roll of bills he tried to press into Eli's hand, and Eli wouldn't take it, so he handed it to Ostrander instead, over Eli's shoulder, the way you do a thing a proud man won't let you do for him. And it went on like that, the whole yard emptying its pockets onto a banker's document case, coins and bills and one man's pocket watch and Mrs. Pyle's second husband's gold tooth. I swear before God, she'd had it pulled and saved, and she put it on the case and said, "Weigh it." And the clerk counted, and counted, and the pile grew, and Ostrander watched it grow with an expression I will remember the rest of my life, the expression of a tired man who has foreclosed 100 ranches discovering, in a bright yard full of his neighbors, that he had hoped every single time to be stopped, and had never once before been stopped, and was being stopped now. It was not enough. I have to tell you that because the false version of this story stops with the pile and the cheering, and I owe you the true one. The valley's love, poured out whole onto a banker's case, came to a good deal of money and a gold tooth, and it was not enough to clear the note. It got most of the way. It did not get all the way. The arithmetic, even softened by an entire valley's heart, still came up short, because that is what arithmetic does. It does not care how many wagons come up the road. And in the silence after the counting, when everyone understood it had fallen short, Ostrander did the thing that I think he had ridden out half-hopping he might find an excuse to do, and that the yard full of neighbors gave him at last the cover to do. He closed the case. "The institution," he said slowly, "is permitted at the discretion of its agent to restructure a note where there is demonstrated community standing and a credible plan of repayment." He looked around the yard. "I believe I have rarely seen community standing more thoroughly demonstrated." He looked at the pile. "This will go against the principle. The balance I'll carry, restructured, at terms a working ranch can meet, provided." And here he looked at Eli direct. "The ranch keeps doing whatever it is it's been doing all winter that brought half the county out on a Tuesday morning to stand in its yard." He'd needed the excuse. The valley gave him the excuse. He took it. Men are sometimes less cruel than their own arithmetic when their neighbors crowd in close enough to remind them they're men. I do not remember Eli saying anything at all. I remember him standing in his burying shirt in the middle of his saved yard, and I remember him taking off his hat, the way he'd taken it off to the wagon in October, baring his head. And I think now that both times it was the same gesture and meant the same thing, which was something past gratitude, something closer to what a man does in a church. And I remember the children pouring out of the house, all 10, no longer reading the weather having broken, Caleb hollering more at nobody and everybody, Tilda riding Buck the dog like June used to ride the cow, Asa coming out last and slowest with his hand over his mouth, and the whole bright yard full of the valley and the children and the noise, the glorious unbraced noise, the dry creek running again noise. And Eli stood in the middle of it with his hat in his hand. I'd like to tell you it was all green pastures after. It was not, and I won't insult the winter we'd survived by pretending the road past it was smooth. The restructured note was still a note. The North Quarter was still Pierce's, and Caldwell water still ran to Caldwell ground only by Pierce's neighborly say-so, which Pierce gave freely the rest of his life and his son gave after him. But it was given, not owned, and Eli felt that difference every dry summer to the end of his days. Lily, the baby, took a fever in her third winter that we very nearly lost her to, and I watched the word sick do its old terrible work on Eli for a fortnight, watched him sit by her the way he must have sat by June, watched him stare down the thing that had taken his daughter and dare it to take this one. And it didn't that time she lived. She's living yet last I heard with grandchildren of her own out near Bozeman. But the daring of it aged him a year and 2 weeks, and we both knew it could have gone the other way, and that there'd be other fevers, other winters, that you don't get to keep 10 children through to grown without burying your heart a dozen times in advance against the chance of it. He knew that going in. That was the bravery of it I didn't understand till later. In October I'd thought the brave thing was the yes, the door held open, the 10 kept together, the no refused, and that was brave. But the braver thing, the thing I only understood watching him by Lily's feverbed 3 years on, was that Eli had opened that door knowing exactly what it cost, knowing the door swung both ways, knowing that to let yourself love 10 children is to sign up in advance for 10 chances to stand by a grave again. And he'd done it anyway, eyes open, in a tack room on a foggy Tuesday. A man who of all men knew best what loving a child could cost, and chose to pay it 10 times over rather than be one more closed door in a child's long count of closed doors. Mercy stopped counting the lost ones eventually. I noticed it one summer and asked her gentle, did she still keep the roll, and she looked at me puzzled a second and then her face cleared and she said, "Oh, no, I count these ones now," and she meant the 10, the safe 10, and she counted them at night still, but it was a different count. A keeping faith with the living count, and that may be the truest measure I have of what that ranch did. It turned a child's roll of the lost into a roll of the kept. Asa never left, worked the place his whole life, took it over when Eli got too old to ride it, runs it yet ran it, I should say. This was all a long time ago, and I am an old man writing it down at last because I am the only one left who saw the wagon come up the road, and I'll not have it go unaccounted. He named his own first son Eli. Of course he did. There's an Eli Caldwell on Quartz Creek to this day, 4th one now I think, and not one of them carries a drop of the first Eli's blood, and every one of them carries his name. And if you want to argue with me about what makes a family, I'll show you that name running down 4 generations off a foggy morning and a wagon nobody else would take, and you can keep your blood. Eli died in the spring, which was like him, to go out on the prettiest day of the year and make all the rest of us love spring mornings again instead of dreading them, undoing in his dying the one cruel thing the world had done on that April morning of the bank. He died in his bed in the house he'd built on against the frost, with the new wing 20 years weathered and not green anymore, solid as anything, and there were grown children and their children in every room of it. And I was there, old as I am, because where else would I have been? He didn't say much at the end. He never did. But the last clear thing he said, and Asa heard it too, Asa was holding his hand, the last thing was, he said, "Tom." And I leaned in because I thought he wanted me, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me at the little ones underfoot, the great-grandchildren, the noise of them, and I understood he meant the house. He meant the whole long, impossible, loud life of it. And what he was saying was the thing Sarah used to say, the thing he'd said to me with the lamp low on the very first night. The door just opened, the children newly breathing in the dark front room. Sarah always did say this house was too quiet. And then he smiled, the way you smile at someone across a room you're about to cross to. And he closed his eyes, and the house was not quiet. The house was so far from quiet. The house was full to the rafters with the racket of every child the world had once tried to drive on past. And that, I have always thought, is exactly how he'd have built it if you'd given him the whole of heaven to design and told him spare no expense. We buried him up on the rise, 3 stones now where there'd been 2. I keep meaning to add a line to the ledger for the day he died, and every time I sit down to it I find I can't account for it. Same as that first day, the 22nd of October, 10 came, he kept the door open. Some sums a man can't carry to a total. Holly's was wrong about that, and right about everything else, and he's been dead 50 years, and I miss him. And I miss Eli. And I'm an old man in a loud house full of other men's grandchildren who call me the name on no stone. And if you told me on that foggy Tuesday with my tobacco going stale on the fence post that this was the life coming up the road at me, I'd have said you didn't understand the arithmetic.